Aloha, pastoral colleagues. I'm just tucked away here in a little room, and I thought that I would just take a moment or two and just maybe that we could just journey a little bit on in an area in which is our calling, because God has called us to be leaders. But I think even further and deeper than that, that God has called us to be spiritual leaders. So He's called us into full-time ministry. He has called us into spiritual leadership. And I know you are like me, that constantly, look, we want to be all that God has called us to be. God has gifted us. He has empowered us. He has given us what is necessary for spiritual leadership. So how do we take these tools and use them all to the honor and glory of God? And how can we learn from lessons in the past of leaders who have been recorded, whose lives have been recorded in Scripture? How do we take their lives, successes and their failures, and take those and apply them to our own context, to our lives and ministries, and learn some of these lessons? So that's just simply what I want to do for just a few moments here today. I'm just going to take a very familiar story. It's a story of King Jehoshaphat. This is just from 2 Chronicles chapter 17, 18, 19. And from his life, can we draw some life lessons when it comes to spiritual leadership? And so, look, I think this is an opportunity in which we can grow, and we can grow together. Because as I mentioned earlier, I want to continue to grow, to develop, and I know that you do too. So, Jehoshaphat, interesting, fascinating story. And of course, as you read through the Old Testament, particularly during the era of the kings, there's bad king, good king, bad king, good king, bad king, and then a good king. Jehoshaphat, I would consider as a good king. Started off strong. There towards the middle, he had a bit of a colossal failure as a spiritual leader, but then ended strong. So, what are some of the lessons, spiritual leadership lessons, that we can learn from Jehoshaphat? So 2 Chronicles chapter 17, there's just 3 little sentences in the first few verses that I think clearly define early on his relationship with God, because he started off as a reformer. So he was tearing down the Baals of worship, the high places of worship, the wooden images of worship. And so some of the descriptions here are that the Lord was with Jehoshaphat, that Jehoshaphat sought the God of his father. But I love this line. This is in verse 6. And his heart was delighted in the ways of God. His heart was devoted to God. I want to reflect on that for just a moment, because I think, that clearly is a spiritual leadership lesson for us. Because you see, as leaders, even in the church, our hearts can find ourselves being devoted to all kinds of different things. In the church, it can be devoted to policy, can have a heart that's devoted to orthodoxy, a heart devoted to theology. These are all good things. But as spiritual leaders, first and foremost, our hearts and our lives are to be devoted to God. And then, as spiritual leaders, it is our calling to lead our people to have hearts and lives that are devoted to God. That's exactly, that's the description of Jehoshaphat early on. But then you got to come to chapter 18, unfortunately. You got to come to chapter 18, and he finds himself being requested by King Ahab. And of course, we know that King Ahab was just one of the baddest dudes that you're going to find in Scripture, as far as leadership, as far as the king is concerned. Ahab, this was one bad guy. And so Ahab invites Jehoshaphat and says, hey, listen, I've got this huge battle coming up. What do you say? Let's form an alliance, all right? Let's just, if we do this together, there's a good chance we're going to survive this. And then Ahab looks around and he says, hey, by the way, all of my counselors they're on board with this. They're saying, hey, look, this is a great idea. Go into battle. There's going to be a massive victory. It's all yours for the taking. Just do it. But Jehoshaphat, we got to give him credit for this. He says, whoa, 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 Ahab. Isn't there a prophet of God around here somewhere? Isn't there someone that can bring us counsel from the Lord? So I'll give Jehoshaphat credit for that. He paused long enough and says, hey, look, there's got to be somebody around here that we can turn to. Is there a word from God? And Ahab says, oh yeah, there's a prophet, but I hate the guy. I can't stand his guts because he's always saying bad things about me. Jehoshaphat says, well, I don't care. Go find him and let's find out from him what he has to say. So they go track him down, this prophet, and the prophet in essence says, you know what? This is not a good idea. This is not the way of the Lord. I would not advise doing it. And this is where Jehoshaphat missed a prime opportunity to shine when it comes to spiritual leadership. As soon as he heard that, he should have said, whoa, 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 King Ahab. That it is clear to me, this is not the way of the Lord. I'm not going with you. I'm not going to defy the counsel of God. I'm not going to do it. He could have stood. He could have made a stand, but he didn't. And so they go into battle. And in the midst of the battle, King Ahab is killed. Jehoshaphat barely escapes by the skin of his teeth. And when he's finally hobbling back home into Jerusalem, he is met by another prophet. And the prophet, so this is in chapter 19. So the prophet, in essence, says, oh, Jehoshaphat, you blew it. Big time. You blew it. But, he says, this is the prophet to Jehoshaphat. After this colossal failure, he says, but nevertheless, good things are found in you, in that you have removed the wooden images from the land and have prepared your heart to seek God. I love that. Prepared your heart to seek God. I'm going to share with you just this is one of my favorite little passages, I should say, and thoughts from Steps to Christ. This is talking about, hey, look, it would have been easy for God to just simply write Jehoshaphat off and says, hey, listen, I give you many opportunities. I called you. You were placed into leadership, spiritual leadership. You blew it. Adios, sayonara. You're gone. You're out. It's history. But he didn't. God didn't. So I want you to just listen to these words here, because the prophet is very clear here in chapter 19 and in verse 2 or 3. Nevertheless, good things are found in you, in that you have removed the wooden images from the land and have prepared your heart to seek God, i.e., to whom is your heart committed to? So let me just read this to you. So this is Steps to Christ, page 57 and 58. She says here, the character is revealed not by occasional good deeds or occasional misdeeds, but by the tendency of the habitual words and acts. And then she asks this question, so who has your heart? Isn't that the point that's being made here with Jehoshaphat? God knows your heart. The question here is, so who has your heart? As a spiritual leader, who has your heart? With whom are our thoughts? Of whom do we love to converse? Who has our warmest affections and our best energy? Obviously, God saw something in the heart of Jehoshaphat and said, I'm not giving up on this leader. There is something there. There is something tucked away in his heart. I'm not giving up on this guy. And then you come to the very next chapter. And this is where you find the spiritual leadership of Jehoshaphat shines, because he learned his lesson. He had learned his lesson as a spiritual leader. So now he's facing a multitude. The Moabites, the Ammonites, all these other They have formed an alliance. They are coming after Jehoshaphat, Jerusalem. They're coming at him. But I want you to notice here, this is what Jehoshaphat does this time. You know the story, so this is familiar to you. But he calls all the people together for prayer and fasting. And he stands in front of the people as their leader, as their spiritual leader, and he just pours out his heart. It's just one of the most beautiful prayers. Tucked in this prayer is a single line that I know that you know, but I'm going to share it again here with you again. So he's praying, he says, "Oh God, we have no power against this great multitude that is coming against us, nor do we know what to do, but our eyes are upon you." God, we don't know what to do. I mean, this battle, this crisis, we don't even see any way out. We don't know what to do, but our eyes are upon you. And you know what happens next. I mean, you know the story. They send out the choir in front of the army and all of the people. The choir, in essence, just sings the doxology. And God brings about just a mighty victory for his people and his leader. Wow. So I think there's a few lessons in here for us as spiritual leaders. Hey, look, let's just acknowledge that we all have battles. As a spiritual leader, we have battles that we end up having to just deal with. There's crisis after crisis that we have to deal with in the church. In the church. It's what we have to deal with as spiritual leaders. But the thing I love about Jehoshaphat, so as we learned earlier, his heart was devoted to God. Devoted to God. And even though partway through his leadership, he obviously made a huge mistake. God didn't give up on him, but he did make a huge mistake and blunder. But he recognized it, and he determined in his heart, because his heart was devoted to God, he determined in his heart he wasn't going to make that mistake again. And the next time he was faced with this huge decision and a massive, massive crisis, he says, "All right, people, let's gather together. Let's have a season of prayer. Let's have a season of fasting. Don't know what to do, but our eyes, oh God, are upon you." So listen, here we are as spiritual leaders today. And look, we all go through stuff. I know that I do. I know that you do. And the reason why I know is because I know that the devil, the bullseye is smack dab on you as a spiritual leader and on me. He's going to just make sure that we're just dealing with stuff all the time. There's these skirmishes and these battles, and there's these crises that we have to deal with. But let's just make sure that as the spiritual leaders of today, that our hearts and our lives are fully devoted to God, and that we do seek the counsel of God, and then we do follow God as he leads and guides us through whatever it is that we find ourselves going through. And to make sure that we have given our people the opportunity to find their lives as well being fully devoted to God. So listen, guys, I just wanted to share this with you. We're all on this journey together. We're leaders, we're spiritual leaders. We're wanting to grow and develop to be all that God. We want to be impact players for God, everything that he has called us to be, to make a difference. We want our lives and our leadership to make a difference. So I just want to tell you again, I love you, I'm proud of you, I'm grateful for you, for your lives, for your leadership, and it's a privilege to journey with you, and we are on this journey together. So be of courage as a called spiritual leader of God. Be of courage, because our eyes are upon him. God bless.